We are diving into a massive stack of sources today. We're talking congressional reports from the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, deep dive analyses from the Brookings Institution, academic journals parsing the nuances of soft and sharp power, and international investigative reports from the UK all the way to Sweden.
It is a lot of material.
It is. And the mission for this deep dive is to basically decode an entire ecosystem.
Right.
Because we're looking at international study programs, student associations, cultural institutes, and even think tank funding. And we're going to use all these sources to understand how Beijing bridges the gap between, seemingly normal cultural outreach and state-directed political influence. Specifically, how China uses its international students, student bodies, associations, and institutes for its global view.
Yeah, it is a vast network.
Yeah.
And to truly understand it, you really have to strip away the assumption that educational exchange is inherently benign.
Right, because when you walk across a typical university campus in the West, it all looks incredibly organic, right? You've got student clubs handing out flyers, language departments hosting cultural fairs, nervous freshmen trying to figure out where the library is. It just looks like a wild garden just growing on its own.
Right.
But the sources we are looking at today argue that a massive section of this garden isn't organic at all. It's a highly engineered root system cultivated by a single gardener for a very, very specific geopolitical purpose.
Right, and the terminology used in the academic journals we reviewed really clarifies this distinction. We're not talking about soft power here.
Okay, clarify that, because people use that term a lot.
Yeah, soft power is about attraction.
Yeah.
It's the allure of Hollywood, the appeal of French cuisine, or, the draw of a world-class university.
Right.
You're persuading people to like you by just being culturally attractive. It's passive.
Right. Soft power is passive. But the reports emphasize sharp power, which is an entirely different mechanism.
It operates on a different axis entirely.
Yeah.
Sharp power isn't about attraction at all. It's about penetration, manipulation, and distraction. It's asymmetric. The strategy involves using the inherent openness of democratic societies against them.
Like using their own rules against.
Exactly. Their academic freedom, their free markets, their decentralized institutions. The goal is to suppress dissent, shape narratives, and exert control from the inside out.
So if we're going to map out this root system, we really have to look at the gardener first. And the grand strategy driving all of this, according to the sources, is the United Front.
Yes.
Now, we're looking at classic Leninist United Front theory here, right? The 1920s playbook of co-opting the middle.
The lesser enemy.
Right, the lesser enemies. To isolate and defeat the primary rival. But what I don't quite get, and maybe you can help me here, is how you map a century-old revolutionary political doctrine onto modern stuff like biotechnology and artificial intelligence. Like, how does that translate today?
Well, the mapping works because the core mechanism of the United Front hasn't actually changed. They've just updated the target assets. So the Chinese Communist Party's United Front Work Department, or UFWD, historically focused on domestic control.
Right.
Co-opting intellectuals, business leaders, people who weren't necessarily communists but were useful fellow travelers. But under President Xi Jinping, this has seen a massive resurgence and a massive global pivot.
Right. The reports mentioned he calls it a magic weapon.
A magic weapon for the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. And early in his tenure, the CCP added roughly 40,000 new UFWD cadres.
40,000 new officials. That is a bureaucratic scale-up that tells you exactly where their priorities are.
And those priorities are fundamentally economic and technological. According to the Brookings Institution analysis in our stack, China is navigating a massive structural shift right now.
Right.
They know they cannot rely on cheap labor and exports forever. The mandate is to transition into a knowledge-based global tech superpower, dominating AI, biotech, quantum computing, advanced semiconductors.
And the Brookings report summarized the ethos perfectly, I thought. They said, have talent, we'll thrive.
Precisely. They are facing a high-skill labor bottleneck. So, the United Front's modern mandate heavily prioritizes what they call overseas Chinese work.
Okay.
They aim to exploit ethnic, cultural, and economic ties to mobilize sympathetic communities abroad. The objective is multi-pronged. You ensure these diasporic communities support CCP policies. You incentivize them to bring their acquired talents and intellectual property back to China.
Right.
Or you have them serve China's interests while remaining embedded in Western institutions. all while actively marginalizing any political opponents within those same communities.
So looking at the mechanics of this, is the UFWD essentially functioning like a massive global corporate alumni network,
Huh?
but orchestrated by a state intelligence and political apparatus to crowdsource R&D and political cover?
That's a highly accurate way to visualize the structure, actually. It relies on the shared identity and mutual benefit that an alumni network uses,
Yeah.
but the coordination is top-down from an authoritarian state. And the stakes are global hegemony. This creates a fascinating and incredibly difficult tightrope for Western counterintelligence.
Because you absolutely cannot risk profiling or discriminating against individuals of Chinese descent.
Exactly.
I mean, many of these people are citizens of the US, the UK, or Australia, and have absolutely nothing to do with the CCP.
The U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission report explicitly highlights this exact dilemma. Counterintelligence agencies have to focus strictly on the intelligence collectors and the behavioral mechanisms of influence,
Right.
rather than the ethnicity of the individuals involved. But the CCP actively weaponizes this exact sensitivity. By intentionally blurring the lines between state influence, cultural heritage, and diaspora community building, Beijing makes it incredibly difficult for open societies to investigate these networks without appearing prejudiced or xenophobic.
It's a very effective shield, frankly. So if the grand strategy is hoovering up talent and securing ideological alignment for this economic transition, you need capital to grease the wheels.
You do.
Which brings us to the China Scholarship Council, the CSC. This is the body under the Chinese Ministry of Education that funds Chinese citizens studying abroad and foreign students studying in China.
And they deploy serious capital, allocating scholarships both to individuals and in massive batches to specific foreign universities to build institutional pipelines.
I want to push back on this a bit, though, just to make sure we aren't just projecting authoritarian motives onto standard state bureaucracy,
Yeah.
because it is completely normal for nations to fund international study.
Right.
The U.S. has the Fulbright program, the U.K. has Chevening, Germany has the DAD. These programs also have intense vetting processes. So why are the sources pointing to the CSC as a national security issue rather than just a robust version of a Fulbright?
Well, the distinction lies entirely in the legal and ideological mechanisms attached to the funding. A Fulbright scholar represents their country, sure, but they are not legally bound to support the political ideology of the current U.S. administration.
Right.
Nor are they penalized for criticizing it. The CSC operates on a fundamentally different legal framework. According to a 2020 U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission report, certain CSC scholarships require recipients to explicitly support the leadership of the Communist Party and the path of socialism with Chinese characteristics.
Okay, so ideological alignment is a prerequisite, but how is that actually enforced once a student is sitting in a lecture hall in London or Stockholm? Like, they're thousands of miles away.
The enforcement mechanisms are what upgrade this from a scholarship to a tool of sharp power. So in January 2023, the Swedish newspaper Dagens Nyheter actually obtained the contracts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they uncovered that Chinese students studying in Sweden on CSC funds had to sign literal loyalty pledges to the CCP. And here's the enforcement lever. If they violated these pledges, perhaps by attending a pro-democracy protest or saying something critical about Beijing's human rights record in a seminar,
Yeah.
they were required to have named guarantors back in China.
Wait, guarantors? Meaning family members?
Usually parents or close relatives, yes. These guarantors would be legally forced by the state to repay the entirety of the scholarship if the student breached the ideological terms.
Well, wait, let me make sure I have the mechanics of this right. If a 22-year-old student at a university in Sweden writes a sociology paper critical of the CCP,
Mhm.
their parents in Shanghai are legally and financially on the hook for tens of thousands of dollars.
That is the exact contractual reality. On top of that, the UK Telegraph reported that CSC-funded students were required to undergo mandatory ideological training before they were even allowed to leave for the UK.
That's incredible.
But what we are looking at is an extraterritorial extension of Chinese law. It transforms a financial grant into a binding cross-border contract of political allegiance.
It effectively uses the student's family as collateral to enforce speech codes on a foreign campus. I mean, that completely breaks the foundational assumption of academic freedom that Western universities operate on.
It does. And this realization is triggering a severe backlash. In July 2025, the U.S. House Select Committee formally urged several major universities, specifically calling out Dartmouth and Notre Dame,
Okay.
to completely sever their ties with the CSC. The argument is that you cannot maintain the integrity of a research institution if a segment of your student body is operating under the legal threat of a foreign authoritarian government.
Right. So they've legally and financially tethered the individual student to Beijing. But, a legal contract in a filing cabinet doesn't enforce itself thousands of miles away in a dorm room.
Right.
If you are going to monitor compliance, you need boots on the ground.
Yeah.
And that transitions us to the Chinese Students and Scholars Associations, or CSSAs.
The CSSAs are one of the most complex layers of this ecosystem. There are over 142 chapters in the U.S. alone.
Wow.
And they exist on almost every major Western campus. Now, it's important to establish that they provide genuine, necessary social goods.
Right, because if you are an 18-year-old arriving in a foreign country, navigating a second language, trying to figure out how to sign a lease or set up a bank account.
It's terrifying.
It's terrifying. You desperately need a community of people who understand your culture to help you land on your feet.
And the CSSAs fill that void effectively. They host Lunar New Year galas, they organize airport pickups, they help students settle in. But the investigative reports in our stack reveal that this social utility serves as a cover for a secondary function.
Okay.
While acting as a social hub, they simultaneously operate as administrative extensions of the state. There is extensive evidence of them receiving direct financial support and explicit ideological guidance from Chinese embassies and consulates.
And the mechanism for this isn't even always covert, is it? I mean, the sources highlight how some of these groups operate out in the open, at least in their Chinese language documentation.
The documentation is staggering. Take the Southwestern CSSA, which is a massive coalition covering universities across California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Hawaii.
Huge area.
Yeah. Their own charter explicitly states that they accept the guidance of the Los Angeles Chinese consulate. They even mandate that presidential candidates for their student group must be approved by the consulate before they can run.
Wait, a foreign government consulate vetting the candidates for a campus student club?
It goes beyond administrative vetting into hardline political red lines. The University of Tennessee CSSA charter explicitly states that members must fervently love the motherland.
Wow.
Furthermore, if you're a student from Hong Kong, Macau, or Taiwan, and you want to join this campus group to find a roommate or attend a cultural event, the charter dictates you must first declare support for the One China principle.
So you have to adopt a highly contested geopolitical stance just to join the primary social group for Chinese speakers on your campus.
Exactly.
That is an incredible chokehold on the community. But let's get into the anecdotes from the sources, because this is where the sharp power stops being just about restrictive club bylaws and turns into active physical interference.
Right. The transition from social club to political enforcer is well documented. A prime example of the mobilization aspect involves verified reports from George Washington University in UW-Madison.
Okay.
In those instances, CSSA members were handed cash, often petty cash, distributed directly into unofficial or personal bank accounts by consulate officials.
For what?
To pay students to attend rallies greeting visiting Chinese leaders.
So they are literally funding astroturfing, paying for the illusion of spontaneous, massive grassroots support for the cameras.
Yeah.
But the enforcement side gets much darker than that. Look at the mechanism at play during the Dalai Lama incident at the University of California, San Diego.
UCSD is a textbook case study in sharp power deployment. When the university announced they had invited the Dalai Lama to speak at commencement, the CSSA didn't just organize a peaceful protest or write an op-ed.
Right.
They threatened tough measures against the university administration itself. And the CSSA leadership publicly admitted they were waiting for advice from the Chinese consulate on how to escalate the situation.
The student group is openly acting as a proxy for the consulate to pressure the university administration. That is bold. But the Egypt Uyghur case from 2017 is the one that really stopped me in my tracks.
That incident crosses the line from campus politics into state security operations.
Yeah.
According to reporting from Radio Free Asia, Egyptian police began rounding up Uyghur students in Cairo, reportedly in direct coordination with Chinese state security agents.
Mm-hmm.
Two of the detained Uyghur students provided testimony that the president of the local CSSA was physically present at the police station,
Met at the police station.
actively assisting Chinese security men and interrogating them about their religious practices.
So much for just organizing the campus intramural soccer team. I mean, that is an insane escalation of extracurricular activities. A student body president acting as an interrogator for state security.
It is.
And the mechanism they use to maintain their standing on campus despite this behavior is fascinating to me. The sources show they actively bifurcate their identity based on language.
It is a very deliberate deception. If you look at the English versions of CSSA websites, which is the only version the university administrators or student government officials usually read.
Right, naturally.
They present themselves as 100% student-run, non-political, independent cultural clubs. But if you toggle to the Chinese version of the exact same website, the language shifts entirely. They openly thank the consulates for their funding, guidance, and ideological direction.
It's brilliant, frankly. One face for the host institution to maintain their official club status, secure university funding, book meeting rooms, and another face for their members and the Chinese government to demonstrate their loyalty and enforce compliance.
It creates an absolute administrative nightmare for Western universities.
I can imagine.
How does a dean of students police a group that is undeniably providing vital social support for a vulnerable international student population, while simultaneously functioning as a proxy for a foreign intelligence apparatus to monitor and suppress the free speech of those same students?
It's an impossible spot for a university to be in. Okay, so we see how Beijing uses the CSSAs to put a leash on their own diaspora. But if you're Beijing, that's only half the battle. If you want to shape the global narrative, you can't just silence your own citizens.
Right.
You have to silence the host university itself. And you can't just threaten an American or British department chair with a guarantor in Shanghai. So how do you penetrate the host institution? You use the Confucius Institutes.
The Confucius Institutes, or CIs, represent the most formalized, institutionalized layer of this strategy.
Okay.
They are funded by the Chinese International Education Foundation, which was previously known as the Hanban.
And what is a Hanban?
The Hanban was an entity directly linked to the CCP's propaganda department and the United Front.
But the pitch they make to a university is incredibly enticing because they present themselves as nonprofit language and culture centers. I mean, an administrator is told, "We will provide you with fully trained Mandarin teachers, all the textbooks, cultural event programming, and we'll even fund study abroad trips to China for your American students. And we cover the costs."
It's a sweet deal.
It sounds exactly like Germany's Goethe Institute or the UK's British Council.
Which is exactly the parallel Beijing wants institutions to draw. It is the ultimate disguise for sharp power.
Yeah.
Because everyone else does it, why can't we?
Right.
But when researchers, like those at the National Association of Scholars, actually dug into the operational contracts, which universities often try to keep confidential,
Of course they do.
the reality of the mechanism became clear.
Right, because it's not just about teaching Mandarin. Let's talk about the specific contractual clauses, because this is where the API gets plugged into the university's back end.
That's a great way to frame it. The contracts stipulate that the host university cannot do anything that would tarnish the reputation of the Confucius Institute.
Which is an incredibly vague legal standard. Like, who defines what tarnishes the reputation?
The funder does. And according to Beijing, tarnishing the reputation includes any discussion of Tibet, Taiwan, Xinjiang, the Tiananmen Square protests, or human rights abuses.
Wow.
Because the university has now become financially and operationally dependent on this free programming, they fire their own language adjuncts and rely on the CI teachers.
Right, they've outsourced it.
This contractual clause acts as a massive enforcement mechanism for self-censorship.
The mechanism is just insidious. It is an ideological API plugged into the university's financial backend. Once the administration becomes dependent on the free code to run their language department, they stop complaining about the censorship bugs.
They do.
They start quietly killing proposals for a panel on Taiwan, or they ask a student group not to host a Uyghur speaker, all to avoid jeopardizing the CI funding.
Exactly. They use the soft power of language education as a delivery system. Once they are established inside the gates of Western academic institutions, they leverage that presence to inject sharp power directly into the academic environment.
They don't even have to do the work.
No, they don't usually have to actively censor. The universities do it for them to protect the relationship.
And the sources highlight that this strategy isn't just focused on the US or Europe. The Dialogo Americas report in our stack outlines a massive, concentrated push to establish Confucius institutes across Latin America. What is the specific strategic value there?
Well, Latin America is a long-term strategic play. Confucius Institutes, remember, operate inside universities, not community centers.
Okay.
They are targeting the 20-year-olds who will be the policymakers, diplomats, journalists, and business executives in 10 or 15 years.
Oh, I see.
And Latin America is rich in critical minerals and holds a significant voting bloc in the UN. If Beijing can shape how these future elites understand China, if they can use the CIs to normalize authoritarian cooperation and completely sanitize their view of the CCP's human rights record,
Then they win.
they secure massive long-term geopolitical and economic advantages in the global south.
But the strategy isn't going unchallenged anymore. The article detailing the CI rebrand shows that Western institutions are finally reading the fine print.
Yes, as global scrutiny intensified and numerous reports surfaced regarding CIs interfering in university hiring and curriculum, Beijing realized the brand was toxic.
Yeah, it got too hot.
So they initiated a structural rebrand. They shifted oversight from the government-run hand ban to a supposedly non-governmental foundation, the CIEF, and changed some of the names of the institutes.
And the official reasoning they gave for the rebrand was amazing. They said it was to disperse Western misinterpretation.
Which translates to, you figured out how the mechanism works, so we are changing the shell company.
Right.
They attempted to exploit Western legal loopholes regarding foreign funding disclosures by washing the money through a nominally private foundation. But for many institutions, the rebranding was insufficient. Major universities such as Texas A&M and the University of West Florida have completely severed their ties with the programs. They ultimately calculated that the systemic compromise to their academic freedom and institutional integrity was a price too high to pay for free language classes.
So we've tracked the root system from securing the individual student via the CSC, to policing the diaspora community via the CSSAs, to censoring the academic institution via the Confucius Institutes. But if you are going to truly shape a host nation's global posture, neutralizing the academic layer isn't enough.
No, it's not.
The final boss is the policy layer. You have to influence the think tanks and the foreign policy establishment in Washington, London, or Brussels.
This is the apex of the United Front strategy. It's often referred to as elite capture. The U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission report details how Beijing deploys specific front organizations for this task, notably the China Association for International Friendly Contact, or CAFC, and the China-United States Exchange Foundation, known as USEF.
CSEF is the name that dominates this section of the research. Who is actually behind it?
CSEF was founded by Tong Chihua. He was the very first chief executive of Hong Kong after the 1997 handover. But more importantly, he served as a vice chair of the Chinese People's as Political Consultative Conference.
And just to clarify the bureaucracy, because there's a lot of acronyms here, the CPPCC is essentially the highest-ranking entity that oversees the entire United Front system, right?
Correct. It is the premier institutional organ of the United Front. Now, organizations like CSEF and CAFC present themselves to the West using incredibly benign language. Their mission statements are all about fostering friendly exchanges, mutual understanding, and peace.
It hides the soft power honey trap all over again.
But the underlying reality is very different. CAIFC, for example, has well-documented, deep ties to the Chinese military and state security apparatus. These front groups operate by funneling massive amounts of capital into the absolute highest echelons of Western policy research.
What does that look like in practice?
They fund endowed professorships, they sponsor major research initiatives, and pay for lavish fact-finding trips to China for scholars at prestigious institutions. We're talking about elite hubs like Johns Hopkins SAS, the Brookings Institution, and the Carnegie Endowment.
Let us walk through the actual life cycle of how this money shapes reality, because I think a lot of people assume elite capture means handing a think tank scholar a briefcase full of cash to write a pro-China op-ed.
Right.
But it's much more subtle than that, isn't it? Like, is a Brookings scholar really going to sell out their academic rigor for a grant?
It rarely looks like a direct bribe. It is about subtle alignment of interests and shaping the parameters of acceptable debate. So the mechanism works like this. CSEF funds an endowed chair or a research center. The scholars in that center know that to continue their research, To keep getting visas to do fieldwork in China and to maintain access to Chinese officials, they cannot cross certain red lines.
Right, the self-censorship kicks in, just like with the Confucius Institutes.
Exactly. So a researcher writes a paper on U.S.-China trade. Instead of concluding that China is weaponizing its supply chains, they soften the language. They conclude that decoupling is economically inefficient and mutual cooperation is necessary. It is academically sound on the surface, but the framing heavily favors Beijing's desire to prevent tariffs or sanctions.
And the brilliance of the strategy, as one of the experts in the sources noted, is that Beijing is outsourcing its propaganda to naive or self-interested intermediaries.
That is the core mechanism of elite capture. If the CCP propaganda department publishes a white paper claiming that China's rise is entirely peaceful and beneficial to U.S. interests, every policymaker in Washington immediately dismisses it as state propaganda.
Right, they throw it in the trash.
But if a highly respected Ivy League-educated scholar at a top-tier D.C. think tank publishes a peer-reviewed paper arguing the exact same thesis, a paper quietly underwritten by a united front group,
The conclusion instantly has the veneer of objective Western academic credibility.
and that paper gets summarized in an executive brief, which lands on the desk of a U.S. senator, which then influences how they vote on technology export controls or military funding. Beijing effectively cultivates these Western friendship envoys to echo their preferred narratives. It subtly, but decisively, shifts the entire Overton window of foreign policy discourse without the CCP ever having to speak directly.
Which is why we need to care about this stuff, because the research coming out of these institutions dictates the news articles you read, the foreign policy your government enacts, and the economic strategies your companies follow. It shapes your daily reality.
It absolutely does.
It is just breathtaking in its scope when you look at the entire machinery at once. It's not just a collection of random cultural programs. It is a meticulously layered strategy for total narrative control.
It is a vertical integration of influence.
Let's recap the layers real quick. You start at the foundation with the China Scholarship Council, using state capital and the legal threat of family guarantors to secure the ideological loyalty of the individual student. Once that student is abroad, you deploy the Chinese Students and Scholars Associations to organize them, utilizing consulate cash to manufacture grassroots support while actively monitoring and suppressing dissent within the diaspora.
Then, to ensure the host university doesn't interfere, you install Confucius Institutes. They act as the ideological API, providing financial relief to the university's language department in exchange for absolute silence on Beijing's human rights record.
And finally, to shape the laws and foreign policy of the host nation itself, you deploy CSF and CAIC. You capture the policy elites, ensuring that the research guiding Western lawmakers is subtly skewed to protect Beijing's strategic interests.
It is an incredibly effective exploitation of the very foundations of open societies. And it leaves us with a profound operational paradox.
What's that?
Well, open, democratic societies are built entirely on the principles of academic freedom, the unrestricted exchange of ideas, and the presumption of good faith. But we are looking at an authoritarian system that views those exact freedoms not as virtues, but as attack vectors, vulnerabilities to be penetrated by sharp power.
Which raises the ultimate question. How do free societies protect their institutions and their diaspora communities without resorting to the very closed-mindedness, paranoia, and discrimination that they stand against?
It is the defining counterintelligence and academic challenge of this era.
And we've spent this entire deep dive mapping how this united front strategy operates through human networks, right? Students, professors, think tank scholars. But as these same tightly monitored students graduate and filter into the Western tech companies developing the next generation of artificial intelligence and quantum computing, how does this strategy adapt? When the goal shifts from shaping a university panel on Taiwan to extracting algorithmic data and proprietary code, how does the machinery evolve? Something to mull over until next time.